Hey, everybody. Welcome to Big Blend Radio. Today, we are so excited to welcome back author Sid Balman Jr. He has recently released the second book in his series. It's called Murmuration. Oh, and we're going to talk to him about what that title means.
Yeah, really?
It's a follow-up to his award-winning novel, Seventh Flag. And he was on our show when that released. I can't even keep track of time exactly when that was. I know we talked about camels, and I know we got to get to talk about that again. But really, along with him being an award-winning author, Sid is a Pulitzer-nominated war and national security correspondent. His career is incredible. He's also a writer in residence at Sul Ross State University. So I encourage you to go to his website, sidbalman.com, and that's B-A-L-M-A-N, sidbalman.com. So welcome back to the show. How are you, Sid?
Thank you, Lisa. I'm great.
Good.
I'm excited to, today is actually the official launch day of the book.
Cool.
And I'm on stop 2 of my book tour. I'm in Dallas right now, so it's all good.
And we should have talked a little bit more before this, because you're in Dallas and so are we. Well, kind of in Dallas. We're around the corner, right? So it's funny because the last time we talked to you, we were in Yuma, Arizona. And it's kind of interesting how the history between Arizona and West Texas connected, which Seventh Flag definitely has. Seventh Flag is really a trilogy, right? So it starts with Seventh Flag, Murmuration, and then you've got another one I know you're working on too, right?
Cool.
Yeah. And the working title is The Sisterhood.
Ooh. Well, this is interesting I know Nancy's just finished Murmuration, and there are women in your book, and it seems that you really take a good look at what is going on in regards to racial inequality and gender equality too.
Yes, definitely. The shifting 2 years ago, we were living in a different country. As Trumpism was fully taking hold. And the paradigm shift has been so accelerated, particularly in those 2 areas, I think.
Wow. I felt like we went back 40 years. Oopsie.
It's funny,
Sorry.
we sort of went back 40 years and turned inside out.
Yeah. What was interesting when we talked with you about Seventh Flag, at the end, we were talking about what was going on in this country. And then we had the Capitol riots, and I had to say, people are like telling us, get off the street. I'm like, don't worry, we were driving and we were listening to the news nonstop. And we were kind of safe where we were. We're like, we're not in DC, and I felt really bad about everybody that was at the Capitol and being hurt. And it's a very traumatic thing. And I know with you, your background, you've traveled with presidents, you've traveled with, all these dignitaries and written about them as a journalist. And you understand, and also in your background of understand what goes on these websites. So I want to go to Murmuration before we get into all of that. But Nancy and I both said that day, Sid Balman said this was going to happen. I want you to know that as we were driving, I was like, where's Sid? He said this kind of thing will happen. That last time we talked, it was basically this could happen, and it did. You called it. Your background, and you understand those websites, those underground websites that happen.
Well, of course, the dark web and all that goes on is everyday people are starting to understand that. But the larger point to me is just the fragility of democracy. In Belarus or Russia or other Nicaragua, the reaction to that sort of event would have been overwhelming and very violent. But in a democracy, you can't generally just fire into a crowd. And so it's I think our democracy is very much in peril right now.
I think we almost forget that we have it. We're so used to having it. And unless it's a world war, we kind of you know, we watch the news, oh, there's a war over there, but we don't really know where the Middle East is. We don't really, maybe a lot of us don't care as long as it's not touching us. Vietnam, people cared because our kids had to go there. But, you know, I think we're pretty insulated in our minds. We think we're more insulated than possibly we are.
That's if you're white.
Yeah. Well, democracy is like a spouse, right?
Yeah.
You can't take it for granted. You have to nurture it. It can slip away so easily.
Yeah.
So Murmuration, can we start with the title? Because it kind of reminds me of Quail. And I love the book cover, by the way. That's so cool.
I have to put in a plug for my very gifted cover designer, Yvette Cantois. She lives in Northern California. She didn't do the first cover, as you recall. Pakistani company did the first one. But I met Yvette in Mexico, just serendipitous. I was down there with a buddy surfing, and we became friendly, and she, you know, asked if she might be considered to do the second cover, because she'd done a lot of things and never did a book cover. And I was happy to give her a shot. I had a very clear idea of what I wanted. And she translated it perfectly. And
wow,
publishers.
Cool.
And the cover has gotten a lot of attention, I'm happy to say. You know, when you're in a bookstore, you know, you want people to see it and pick it up. And I think that's what's happening with this cover.
Well, I love that you talk about bookstores, because that's also very important that we, you know, I know you going to bookstores. You're actually, you know, before this last year, you know, authors weren't really doing many bookstore tours and being able to go to those independent stores. And I think that's another form of democracy, that we do shop the actual bookstore, whether you're visiting them online or not, but the actual independent small business bookstore.
Well, I intentionally only do events at independent bookstores. I'm a big supporter of the independent art movement. My publisher is an independent publisher.
Oh yeah, they're awesome. Yeah.
You know, Amazon is great, but you know, it's the independent artist, the independent entrepreneur that really needs the boost. And so every stop I make is at an independent bookstore.
So Murmuration, the title.
Yeah.
Well, it's a word that not a lot of people recognize, but I think many people have seen the occurrence. A murmuration is, well, you all have traveled around a lot. You've probably seen it. You're driving down the highway and you look in the distance and there's sort of a cloud of birds sort of billowing and moving in sort of a symphonic dance. It's really beautiful. Your listeners can Google it, and there's plenty of examples. And it's starlings that do it. They do it in this country, and interestingly enough, they do it in East Africa. Until I got into it, I mean, as I was thinking about what to call the book, the reason they do it is for protection. And as you can see on the cover, there's hovering predator birds, falcons in this case. And by sort of being that billowing mass, they may lose a few of their friends and family, but it protects the greater flock. And it's metaphorical for the plight of, in my mind, it's metaphorical for the plight of the immigrant and the refugee to this country, to America.
Oh, I love that, because it's also, they find safety in numbers to work together. And I wonder, in the beginning, it used to be like, oh, we have neighborhoods, you know, you've got Jamaica and New York, right? You've got these different neighborhoods, you know, and yet now I wonder if immigrants are now all kind of merging together out of survival.
Well, I mean, in the, you know, the first book in terms of immigrants and Americans, they're Americans, right? If on the Arab immigrants who came over with the camels, which we can talk about.
Yay!
This one, and it started after World War II. Murmuration starts in Somalia during the botched humanitarian intervention under the Clinton started with the Bush administration, and Bill Clinton inherited it. It's a war that I covered as a reporter, and it focuses on a particular Somali family. And of course, the characters from the first book, same characters, same geography. It's a trilogy. And their journey from Mogadishu to a refugee camp in Kenya to West Texas and up into Minnesota. Texas, if you recall, has the largest Muslim population in the country. Minnesota has the largest Somali population in the country. And you talk about neighborhoods, but there's these neighborhoods in Minnesota that look like Mogadishu. It's amazing, actually. And there's also a significant white supremacist movement in Minnesota, which we can talk about if you like. But that really the emergence of fascism, white nationalism, sort of where we left off in the first book. It's about the emergence of that, and I spent a lot of time with those groups in Minnesota. Some shocking connections I found to the Minneapolis Police Department, for example. And remember, years. The book was done and written and being produced, well before Black Lives Matter, well before George Floyd, and the way that it's come out in a very timely way is just.
It's weird because I think about even our last interview, how so much has happened.
Right.
We just really have so much has happened. And Minnesota, I'm like, what? I thought, you guys were making maple syrup and stuff, and you have Prince. I mean, how can they do that in the land of Prince? So all these things are happening there. And
Prince is
so there's these ties, so you've got the Somalis there, you've got the Muslims here, and being in Texas, we spent some time in Austin. We've been out in Banderas County, the cowboy country. We've spent a lot of time in Texas this year, and we're going to be doing more in this year. Last year too. This year. It's all a blur, but we've been in Texas, and I have to say, Texas truly is multicultural, which I love. I mean, it's just you hear so much, music in the neighborhood, so many different sounds and different foods, and it's awesome. But Minneapolis and Minnesota we haven't done yet, and hearing that it's mostly Somali, I think people just immediately think they're all pirates, and I know you cover that.
So funny.
And that's not true. I mean, but that's the thing. These little headlines, well, not little, but things happen. It's like, oh, that's it. We're all that way. I mean, it's like the ugly American tourist. We're not all that way, but there's some definite ugly American tourists.
Well, there are Somali pirates in the second book too, as read it, and the whole piracy phenomenon in Somalia is quite interesting too. And again, it's sort of a classic case of radicalization. It's from the plundering. Somalia has some of the richest fishing areas off its coast. It's got a lot to offer: oil, natural resource, fishing. And when the Somali government dissolved, their waters became fair game for any fisherman anywhere. And they came in within the 12-mile territory boundary and were just plundering the fishing grounds. And that's kind of how piracy started, was to defend those grounds. And the pirates sort of figured out that they could start taking hostages and asking a lot of money. And it just grew into this whole radicalized culture that, we've seen in movies. That Tom Hanks, remember, was Captain Phillips. And, I encountered plenty of pirates over there, but they're a nasty lot.
Yeah. I mean, I think countries like that are, it's easier to be a pirate there than it would be to be a pirate here. Our pirates take the form of politicians a lot of times. And I'm just saying, the educated pirate. But you have the other ones that are just, I don't know how they were raised. where I don't know if they came from desperate homes or super violent homes, or what makes a person turn into some of the people that we have on earth that think it's okay to take whatever they want. And if anybody gets in their way, we can kill them, we can hurt them, we don't care. That, I wonder what goes on in their minds. Like, are they even truly human at that point?
We talked a lot about the process of radicalization in our last interview 2 years ago.
Yeah.
And those are certainly factors. As you may recall, I look at it as a public health issue, with primary, tertiary symptoms, primary, secondary, tertiary treatments. But if you dig a little deeper, and I know this because there was a period of my life where I worked in that area, some of the common denominators are abuse, child disrespect, inequality, and all those factors and others, lack of representation, injustice, just cause a person to not care. If you got nothing to lose, then why not do whatever?
This is really interesting because of the last, we've done a lot of interviews on people who are homeless, and also the crime cycle, and through abuse and crime, and how people end up on the street. And it leads back to everything you just said. Exactly. It is about a traumatic break in the family unit, in the family chain. And when you look at immigration and people moving countries for reasons, nobody wants to walk across a desert or through jungles or through, even the armies and the military, barricades, when they are really just trying. There's the good people. Of course, every country has their bad guys, right? Every country has issues.
Absolutely.
But people fleeing their countries most of the time, from what I've experienced and believe, I could be wrong, they're just trying to really get a better life, especially for their children, and to be able to have an equal opportunity. And so it's kind of this interesting thing with Murmuration. You talk about Somalia, talk about Minnesota having so many Somalis, and it's very interesting. Even in Nebraska, get so many of this kind of, everybody goes somewhere. It's interesting how that happens. Muslims in Texas. Okay, so they immigrate over here. They are Americans. They do so much work. Mexico, hello. Can't forget Mexico. They want to hang out in their original country. But anyway, just saying. So it's people seeking quality of life, my belief, right? Other people will go against that, but they're migrating into a certain area, and there is that thing where we need to we're going to have to coexist, like we need to learn to coexist with nature. And I believe those who are immigrating or moving for a better life and to take care of their family, they're a very strong family unit, actually. And you know what I mean when I'm saying, like, we've come from this country now has become, I'm going to get in so much trouble. We've become very, like Nancy was saying, complacent almost, right? And I'm talking about, let me put it bluntly, white people complacency, maybe not women as much, but that way. And, it hasn't been that easy for, if you're Black, if you're Asian, Puerto Rican, Mexican, Hispanic, there's a list, right? It's not that easy. And then, okay, here comes the Somalis, and that's what I was saying. People will go, oh, you're pirates, when that's not necessarily true, just because that's what made headlines and you helped that. But it's true. We need to know what's going on. But you know what I mean? So it's not like, not every Mexican person is part of the drug cartel. So that's what I'm trying to say. We need to understand each other as human beings.
It's these cliches.
Yeah.
Right.
It took me a long time to get there. I need to be a journalist.
Buried the lead, Lisa. In Minneapolis, Somalis have done very well. They're on the city council. They run nonprofit.
Awesome.
There's business people. But so when I've thought a lot about it, and we're all immigrants, right? In one way.
Mhm.
So, and the book really is about this series of books at its most common level is about what it means to be an American, what it is that unites us rather than divides us. And when a migrant comes into this country, migrant populations going back to after World War II, even before then, they want to integrate, they want to blend in, they want to, put their head down and take part in the
Work.
And I think of it sort of like a pentimento, if you're familiar with the word pentimento. Back during the Renaissance, painting canvases were very expensive. So a lot of artists would whitewash over old canvases, and then they'd put their paintings on it. But eventually, the original painting would start to bleed through.
Mhm.
And I think that is a little bit the way it is for immigrants. You can't expect them, and they don't lose themselves in this process of integration. And sometimes it's that bleeding through that causes problems mentally and emotionally for them, particularly young generations. And that's why so there's a character, one of the primary characters in my book. He is a translator for Adam Arzarkan, the kick-ass West Texas, West Point graduates, Muslim girl, my favorite character.
Yeah.
He is a translator for her in Mogadishu, and that's how they initially hook up, when he meet up. And when he is in his intake, the sergeant at the air base there says, well, his name is Saeed Awale is his real name. Said, well, nobody can pronounce your name. We're going to call you Charlie Christmas. And so that's
so funny.
the name that he carries into America. And he has one of the central conflicts for him is between Saeed Awale, his old self, and Charlie Christmas, his new. And throughout a large part of the book, he has this sort of schizophrenic alter ego that haunts him. I don't want to give any spoilers, but he finally comes to terms with it, and this is going to sound wacky and way out of context, but not if you read the book. While he's doing a ceremony in South Dakota with the Lakota Sioux Indians, Sundan, which is meant to purify. They do this great trek, as I said. They get to Texas, they go up to Minnesota, and they go through South Dakota. The great journey. So that's how I think of migrants. I think it's tough. It's hard enough to move from Washington D.C. to Alpine, Texas, from Mogadishu to Minneapolis.
Right. And it was hard even, on the white side too. I'm going to get emails. I know I'm going to get attacked for it, but look at the Irish, look at the Scottish, it's really everyone. But if you look at the world history, we've all pretty much been nomadic. A lot of us. And I wonder about that. I always just think we have a weird magnet in us to.
I don't think nature cares about boundaries that are natural to the species. So all those property lines and who owns what country and this law over there really doesn't really mean anything when it comes to natural stuff. So like if somebody's bound and determined to go to a place, it's probably because there's a reason, and there's probably something historically, something in their DNA that makes them want to go there. They might find it out years later, or they might not find out ever why there was such a drive to go to a certain place. But I think there's something in the DNA, there's something, because we have roamed all over the place. And it's too bad we have this idea that there has to be boundaries.
Well,
and countries have to be owned by this group of people. I don't know.
Well, America is a great experiment. And people come here for a reason, because there's opportunity and there's freedom. And that's under threat right now, sorry to say, courtesy of our former president and the hounds of
Mhm.
the unleashed.
Yeah.
And I mean, 2 blocks from where I live in Alpine, Texas, there was a guy who was there on January 6th, up on the Capitol. And a couple months ago, the FBI came and raided his house and arrested him. I mean, these
Oh,
people, I mean, I don't mean to say it's a
yeah.
city or anything, but people, again, radicalized people like that are everywhere.
Mm.
Wow.
It's, I mean, not that every Trump supporter is radicalized. I have plenty of friends who are Trump supporters. Everybody's free to choose and vote the way they. But you remember, slightly less than half the country voted for President Trump in this last election.
That's a lot.
Yes. And
Way more than one
Well,
would expect.
Well, this is where, the radicalization, I know we're going right back to it because it's something, it's a cycle that keeps twirling and moving and bleeding out and happening. Action has actually been taken, right? The Capitol Hill, that event, it just goes towards showing where we are as a country right now, this division. And I don't know if we can go backwards. I mean, when you think about when you were covering Bush and Clinton years, did you ever think you'd be seeing this happen in this country?
not in a million years. And remember, so George W. Bush, not
Oh, yes. Sorry.
Mhm.
presidency. So he took over during and managed, I thought, quite well.
Mhm.
The break, the Soviet Union broke up. All those loose nuclear weapons in the Soviet satellites. The Balkans blew up. Rwanda
Yeah.
expansion. It was a very challenging time, and he and his Secretary of State, James Baker, and his National Security Advisor, Brent Scowcroft, I mean, they were Republicans, but they were very skilled, and I thought they did really a masterful job at managing all of that. And I think Bill Clinton might have been a little tidier with his personal affairs, but he
You think?
did a good job too. He had Warren Christopher I thought was underappreciated and a fabulous Secretary of State. That's those Republican or Democrat. They would nurture democracy. They would try to expand democracy, but now it's kind of a joke that we.
Mhm.
Biden comes from that same school, President Biden. But to go to these countries and say, we want to spread American style democracy to your nation, they're like, no thanks.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's even interesting now with us, pulling out of Afghanistan. It's it's an interesting thing about, I was talking with our military history expert, Mike Guardia, and we were talking about Dick Winters, a very highly decorated World War II, just amazing. Band of Brothers. And this paratrooper that goes in on D-Day. I mean, you're flying in on a little balloon thing, hoping like that's some crazy stuff that was going on. And I was just talking about that peace part of it, of pulling out. He said, well, the world wars are a little different than what we were doing in the Middle East. The peace part of it is just World War II. Everybody was like, okay, we're done with this. Let's move on. And the peace part was shorter in that buffer zone. Whereas now in the Middle East, I mean, I think people even forgot what they were there for after a while. Like maybe not the military, but even just general public. We're there. What are we doing? We're there for peace. We're part of building, and then we pull out. Is it good? Is it bad? But what are we supposed to do? Like, how long are we supposed to stay?
One thing we're supposed to do, and this is another sort of coincidence in this second book. So as we're pulling out of Afghanistan, you're probably reading the headlines, these thousands of interpreters and translators they're leaving behind, that they're sitting ducks for Taliban or
Mhm.
Vietnam. I mean, as a journalist, you use those translators in those countries are very valuable. And so, Afghanistan, that's an issue now. Congress just passed
Yeah.
a lot of money to bring them over. And Charlie Christmas, Saeed Awali, is a translator.
Mm.
Part of the story is about not leaving him behind. Both Adamar and this new character who I've introduced, who I really quite like, Prometheus Stone.
I
Mhm.
love that name, by the way.
Yeah.
Your names are cool.
Mm.
You know where I find my names? In graveyard.
Oh,
Yeah.
no way.
Oh, cool.
Prometheus Stone
That's
has to come from
cool.
a graveyard.
Yeah.
Oh my gosh.
That's so cool. That's cool.
He's a
Huh.
captain. He's a lapsed Jew, and a veteran, and
Mm.
a real character, a Cornell graduate, a college football player, and sort of a warrior, your classic warrior philosopher.
Mm.
And
Mm.
he leads the military and travels along with Adamar and Charlie. He settles in Minneapolis and becomes a rabbi. And it's a whole interesting, but he's a good character too. But
Yeah.
anyway, this issue of translators, leaving translators behind is something else that just serendipitously has been coincidental in the second book.
Mm. It is interesting. I mean, over this last 2 years, it is. But translators, is that kind of also the general contractors? Does that happen too when they get left behind? You always hear about deaths in, the different countries and the different
Mm.
campaigns or efforts. And it's not always the military troops that are getting killed, it's the contractors too. And I think that is something we all forget that, and journalists, oh my God, look what's been going on with journalists. I mean, holy cow. I mean, are you glad you're writing books now?
So I covered a bunch of wars. I was embedded with Marines. I was shot at and beaten, and
Oh.
but I liked it. I don't know. I don't know. I felt a great responsibility to be there and to be the eyes and ears. I mean, it sounds trite and cliched, but somebody does need to be there to actually see it. You can't rely on YouTube clips, by some right wing nut or left wing nut. There needs to be journalists there. I mean, that's the point.
Mhm.
But like you said, you were talking about, okay, you talked about the Republican and the Democratic side, and we've gotten to these two polar, crazy opposites, right? And that's where I think we left our senses instead of looking at what it is. And I think that's what's so important about journalism. Do you feel that important in writing fiction? I know we've talked before about going from journalism into fiction, but is it important to have that same integrity so that both sides, because and there's more sides, by the way, I'm one of them. I don't believe in the party system unless it's a party with champagne, but I mean, you know what I mean? It's like the facts are the facts, right? I know you're writing fiction, but it's derivative off of real events. So that integrity, I think, is so crucial.
That's why I like historical fiction.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Kind of,
Yeah.
I think of journalism, and I also teach a couple journalism classes at Sol Ross, where I'm the writer in residence. And I think of journalism as the history interpreted in the best way we can as it unfolds.
Mhm.
Whereas historical fiction is history as we look at it and interpret it in the rear view mirror.
Right. Mhm.
So from my books, I include there's a lot of fiction in there, but then I also blend in a lot of actual events, which is a lot of fun and challenging and interesting because, your editors, I mean, you always have a disclaimer in the book, some fictitious characters, timelines,
Mhm.
and you do play around with that a little bit. And editors kind of hate it when you do that. There's no way, he had a MacBook Pro in 1983.
See?
But I wanted him to.
See, Lisa, that's why I had the chart of the world.
I know.
I
know.
started to write a historic novel about
Yeah.
Kenya, and I was so paranoid about not getting things right across the world. So I started the chart of the world, and I got this big roll of newspaper from a friend, and I covered the walls of the house with it. And I did these timelines so I would know exactly when the typewriter was invented so that I wouldn't have it too soon or too late in my book.
But if Sid
the
says you can do
result
a
was-
Mac Pro now.
I never wrote the book because I got so into the timeline that I was like, this is crazy.
Well, that's my process. My process too. I do
Yeah.
a lot of timelines, a lot of character profiles, just to be
Yeah.
sure. If you're going to alter something, you should do it knowingly, not sort of
Right.
wander into it. And in the end, you can play with it a little bit. But people, I mean, for example, in the first book, Texas A&M University, they didn't formally admit women until I guess it was maybe the 50s or late 50s.
Wow.
But I had a character in the first book, Marcy Laws, who I had going to A&M prior to that.
Oh,
I knew
see.
people would object to that, but I also knew, because I did my research, women were informally admitted to Texas A&M prior to that.
Oh,
I had a couple of women at a book club in Houston, great book club in Houston, call me on it, and I was able to say, so here, it's not, they were actually there prior to that time.
cool.
Wow.
That's cool.
Well,
though.
this is, and
Actually.
I love that you're including women in everything here. Okay, this is important. Women's history, women did a lot, and it, I think we were in a lot of these events, like you're saying. Okay, we were admitted in, but it was just shh, hush, hush. There's a lot of women soldiers. Shh, it's hush,
get to
hush.
be a
There's
nerd.
women snipers too.
You
Come
get-
on,
Yeah.
I know
yeah.
you know about that.
Mhm.
So that's an interesting point. I'm not a feminist, but I mean, my mother was a very powerful, I've been surrounded by powerful women. Not in a negative way, just powerful Texas women where I grew up.
Do not mess with Texas women. I know that for a fact. And they could be so sweet. And it's just like if in your Louisiana, they go, isn't she special?
That line in my first book, Marcy Laws, this Texas woman, has a way with a petticoat and a 30-30.
Exactly.
Yeah, there it is. Mhm.
But so as I was writing the second book, my publisher, Brooke Warner at Spark Press, she, who is a very strong feminist and a very good friend and an excellent publisher, she said, this character of Adamar, who you're starting to elevate, is really compelling and could be generational, very important. But you're just scraping the surface. It's so clearly a man writing about this woman and these issues. She said, you need to, and so she said, I'm going to send you a book and I want you to read it and think about it before, as you're writing about Adamar. And the book was Virginia Woolf's, a book, A Room of One's Own. Her essay about, Virginia Woolf, the mid 1800s British writer. And
Swampy.
yeah,
Swampy.
We call her Swampy. It's from the scene from, anyway. Yeah.
Yeah.
Sorry.
Swampy.
Sorry.
the book is literally about her renting a room scandalously to write in.
Mm-hmm.
The bigger issue is not, the bigger issue is a woman having her own place in a society, to think freely, to write freely, to be free, to be free and in charge. And so Adamar, there's a scene after she's a sniper, a military sniper, West Point graduate, and after her first, what she thinks is her first kill in Somalia of a pirate, coincidentally enough, which is not I don't want to spoil it. Anyway, so she is with Captain Stone and Charlie Chris,
Mhm.
the cafeteria, the PX at the base in Mogadishu, and Stone is worried about her and asks her, and she goes into this soliloquy in which she talks about Virginia Woolf's book, and she talks about having a room of one's own, and talks about why she's a sniper, and how for her that is her private, where she can dots both literally and figuratively, and find the eye space and the head space to do her own thing.
Mm.
And my publisher ended up liking it, and I really worked hard to try and get to understand that.
Yeah.
So she'll emerge she will stick in the third book, which takes place in the future, by the way. Starts with January 6th and the virus.
I knew it. I knew you couldn't let that go.
That's where it starts, and then 30 years in the future to a dystopian, broken up, post-Trumpian, apocalyptic world.
Dang it, Sid. Now, Nancy, you just finished Murmuration.
Yeah.
So as from the female side, I just wanted to see. Don't ruin it for me or the audience.
No. But it does take you. It's a real ride. At some points, I got really angry, and then other times, yeah, I did. And then just like, oh, come on, come on.
I heard that part too.
Yeah.
And
like, no, it's really well written. And definitely people, especially women, should read it. Men can read it too. And they'll be going, what? Oh, come on. Because it brings to the front things that have, I don't know, to me, have been swept under the carpet a long time. And so there's certain aspects of certain people's personalities that you're like, oh boy, I know that person. I know who that is. And I really enjoyed it. I think it should be a movie.
Well, I'm hoping that Netflix, if you're out there, there's been a few nibbles, and I think push now that the second book has come out. I'd love to see it as a streaming series. It's so funny.
Yeah, a series would be, because especially with the third book, like it can, and continuing the characters on. I mean, and just even, okay, sorry, but anyway, yes.
Friends, my close friends, favorite things to do, both men and women, is to send me suggestions for who will play different.
See?
They all want to pick Adamar.
Okay. Who's she going to be?
I don't know.
Meryl Streep. Gotta go.
No, I don't think.
No.
Meryl Streep could play one of the the ranching family women, Marcy.
Oh yeah, don't mess with her. She would be good as a rancher. Yeah, Marcy. Yes, don't. You got to get the camels. Who's going to play the camel? You got to have camels.
What's up with the camels?
Well, they're my favorite. Like seriously, the camels. You got to have, and there's camels out there, so I want to see the camels. The whole series should start with the camels.
You have to re-explain that then, Lisa. Just quickly.
I know, sorry.
So, as I said earlier, and is the case, Texas has the largest Muslim population in the country, Arab Muslim population. And part of the reason for that, at least the way I construed it in my first book, is that in the mid-1800s, President Franklin Pierce decided to launch the U.S. Army Camel Corps. It's a real thing. Camels, they can go a long time. They can live off the cactus and so forth. They don't need a lot of water. And so they launched this initiative with $1 million appropriated by Congress to bring over thousands of camels and camel handlers to the United States. And they came in to Texas, came into Indianola near Houston, and made their way to the desert Southwest. And started the U.S. Army Camel Corps. The experiment ultimately failed, really for three reasons. One, camels are damned ornery. Secondly, they don't get along with horses. And third, the idea of the U.S. cavalry didn't like the idea of slumping around.
Yeehaw.
It's the camel spit, really, because it really does stink.
And they bite.
Yes, but they're awesome.
They really do bite.
But there's an important part of history that is very forgotten. That's when the beginning, I'm like, no way. But I do want to go back, and then you got to tell us about your characters, because I'm not going to let you go on that. But let's look at the seventh flag and why. For those who didn't hear the first time or read the first book, the seventh flag is an important thing.
Mm.
So everybody is familiar with Six Flags, the theme park. And when, that started here when I was a kid, or before I was even born, here outside of Dallas, there was Six Flags amusement park. And it represented 6 sovereigns that ruled over the state of Texas. And the notion of Six Flags, it's gone and kind of lost that, and it's all over as amusement parks. But the notion of a seventh flag, to me, was this new nationality that knows no race, no ethnic group, no religion, that we have in this country now. And again, it's the immigrant population. It's this melange of people, places, and identities that makes up our country. And it is this ambiguous sort of seventh flag that now flies over the country. And what does it mean to be an American under that seventh flag now?
Mm.
I love that. I know that when we were talking before, seeing all the Six Flags, I think it was Nacogdoches where we were. And I think it's important. I mean, we could have more flags too,
Well, find out recently from a historian in West Texas that there was actually there was an actual seventh flag. And it was, it was brief, like 3 months, the Republic of Presidio or something like that.
Oh, wow.
And so maybe accurately, speaking of accurate historical fiction, it should be called the eighth flag.
Yeah. Oh no, who knows? But see, but this is so cool, the journey you're finding out, like the women, it's like all these little things are going to pop out, and it's going to be very interesting getting to the end of the third in your trilogy. I mean, it may go further than that. You never know. Go into that fourth quadrant. You never know.
So, on the subject of women and feminism and so forth, my views have evolved significantly. And that's why I'm going to call the third book The Sisterhood. It's like totally out of line with the whole West Texas thing. But I happen to think that the best ruled nations in the world are ruled by women. New Zealand, for example, America and Germany. And I just think they're better suited for dealing with the kinds of pressures and decisions. So in the third book, as I said, the nation will break up into these self-ruled fiefdoms. Some of them will be good, some of them will be bad. Of course, Adamar will have hers in the Free Republic of West Texas. But one of these fiefdoms will be called the Sisterhood. And it will initially be a group of radicalized women.
Uh-oh.
Not like Amazon. And part of and it will be ruled by a woman who's not so great, Mother, I think they're going to call her, just Mother. Sounds a little bit like what's that series in the book that's so popular by Margaret Atwood?
That's good.
The motherhood.
Yeah,
This sounds like it's going to get crazy, because when you put a bunch of women together that go crazy, like you're in like a whole other world.
The women can think in circles.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, you're talking about a hot mess that
That's a hot
not
mess.
but a hot mess with a direction. And it talk about murmuration. There it is. They'll do that, and it's like they're the quail. You know how quail do that scattering thing too.
Hubby. Well, speaking of circularity, the first sentence in the last chapter of the book, life is circular. But anyway, so Adamar, I'm just starting to outline and think about it, but Adamar will develop some sort of alliance with the Sisterhood, and that will ultimately be the preeminence of this female force, this female chi, will ultimately be the healing and unifying factor in the world.
That's cool. Now, okay, so the actor,
What?
who's going to be her actor, her portrayer? Like,
Adamar?
yeah.
Well, there's some so Adamar, it's a tough one because, she's of Arab descent. She also has turquoise colored eyes, if you recall. So that's, there are Arabs, certain,
Beautiful.
you have Kazakh women and some of the Muslim Russian republics. And in Jordan, you have the I think the Syrians, beautiful blonde women with blue eyes, really striking. So it needs to be an actress who is both an Arab to be authentic, an ethnic Arab with blue eyes. She also has to be, this kick-ass tomboy. She can kick the football and shoot the 30-30.
She's just like, don't mess with her.
Barrel racer and
Wow.
assassin and mother.
Oh, that's important.
So
did she talk to you?
Yes.
Or did she nag you?
Adamar?
Yeah.
Adamar doesn't nag.
She's a one sentence woman.
She tells, demands.
Reasons, and she speaks her mind, but does she talk to me? So these characters, something I've learned as a journalist, it's different when you're writing. You have a set of facts and you convey it. Sometimes artfully, sometimes just the facts. But with a novel, it's a long period of time. And even though I, go to great lengths with character profiles and chapter outlines so that I can, know where I'm going with it, the book and the characters will lead you in it's an organic process. So, the story, you may want to take the story in one direction or a character in a certain direction, but when you get to that point, there's no way it would go that way.
Yeah.
And you have to go with it. So when you say, does Adamar, she does speak to me in that way.
Cool.
I used to attempt to paint people's portraits, and I sucked at it. And the reason I can paint animals. I can paint any animal. That's easy for me. But people, you would get to a certain point where whether the person's sitting for you or it's photo, I would be able that's not who you are. You're really like this. The portrait would come out like, this is what I think you really are. And it wasn't successful.
She could paint musicians though. That's her whole thing,
Yeah.
because that's close while they're performing.
That's
they
close
have to be
wildlife.
performing
Right.
because then it's close to wildlife.
Well, so I was, just along that, sticking with that theme, on my tour for my first book, I went to, went all over the place. It was pre-COVID, so there wasn't a lot of these book events now are Zoom, unfortunately.
Yeah.
I really like being with people.
Yeah.
But so I got a call, Dale City, that tiny little town of 400 people, where Adamar and the Laws family comes from, based on real families and real people.
Cool.
They called me up and they said, you're in El Paso. Can you just come out here to Dale City and do a little book talk? We've never had one. We have one little library. Please come.
That's awesome.
Of course. So I drive over there on my way to Santa Fe, and there's the town chalkboard, literally a chalkboard. It's not,
I love this.
it's
So cool.
Sid Balman, so on and so forth. Come by the library tonight at 6. So I go there and it's packed.
Wow.
Almost all 400 people who could still walk. And I look out into the audience, and as I said, the book is based on real people. I look out in the audience, and I'm like, no, there's all my characters.
No way.
Who know full well who they are in that book.
That's funny.
And I was worried, but you know, oh, there's Adamar, there's Bitsy, there's Eula, there's Jack,
Whoa,
but they loved it. I mean,
Oh, that's
that's
awesome.
cool.
they said that one of their funnest things to do was to guess who was who.
Oh,
And they
cool.
were together about it. And you may remember Bitsy,
Hmm.
first book, who ends up on 9/11 on the top of the World Trade Center and ends up jumping. You know, torrid affair with an investment banker, little Bitsy from Del City, Texas, ends up jumping rather than burning, and holds her skirt at her knees as she's plummeting 120 stories, so that when she lands, it won't be in an embarrassing posture.
Wow.
Yeah.
Wow. Yeah. That speaks volumes, right?
Hmm.
Those kind of things. And yeah,
Yeah.
having, been around just so many people in life in that way, and just, especially in my background and growing up in Kenya, it's so deep. That kind of respectfulness, whether people agree with it or not, it's so deep when people have that true, it just speaks volumes. It
That's
really does.
that is something my grandmother, who I call Nana, who is a 4'9" little British lady, would have said.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, you have clean underwear because you never know when you're getting in a car accident.
Sid,
And hold your skirt down. You know, she was.
she
very-
always said, wear clean knickers when you leave the house.
Yeah,
Okay.
most important thing.
Yeah, Sid, you going and being part of, as a correspondent, when we're talking about all these things, it's like, if you haven't been there, you're watching the talking heads on TV and you teach journalism.
Mm.
And journalism, I think, they are the watchdogs. It's
yeah.
so crucial to have good journalism, and it really came out under attack, right? And then, like, I can speculate on things. I've never been to Afghanistan. I only hear what I'm hearing, reading what I'm reading, speculating. That's all we can do is, but having been there, and then here you are writing in fiction, having been to Somalia, having been to Minnesota, here it is, the place where, George Floyd gets murdered, and watching and seeing that we really do have these underground problems that are now at the surface, really. So all of this has been here in this country for decades, right?
Mhm.
This hatred. And yet now with the internet, we're able to have all these. I mean, there was just that huge sting, right? An international sting with the FBI's and all the different things around the, agencies around the globe taking down criminals with their own, setup. And they fell for it, right? Which is awesome. I mean, it's awesome, but look at what's going on in technology around the world and the internet, and how I think it's brought not just, we can say Trump and everything, but it's been there before him and it's still there. It's just, you have catalysts that help it along the way. And I think the internet is really, I know wildlife trafficking, human trafficking, drug trafficking, human trafficking is huge. We're seeing so much more of it. And I think it's part of it. And it's really kind of a very difficult thing if you haven't traveled out of the country or traveled even within this country and found yourself around something like that to understand. And that's why I think fiction is so powerful, because it gives you the context, because it's so hard to sometimes read what's going on in the newspaper or listen and understand and believe. But you having been through this, do you think you could be writing what you've written accurately and with that integrity if you hadn't gone there as a journalist?
No, well, there's a lot to unpack in what you just said there, Lisa.
Sorry.
I'm glad we're going there. So you're right. The web has been there forever. Predators of all kinds use it in all different ways.
Mhm.
The chat rooms of video games, and it's rife with people and skilled people who recruit, whether it's drug, narcotraficantes or ISIS or white supremacists. They're very skilled, and that is a big part of both books, and a big part of my experience. Besides being in the battlefield is one thing. Being in this field that is now the web is a completely different thing.
It's a new battlefield.
Yes, and probably in both books we talk about ISIS and Al Qaeda, and also the emergence of white supremacy and white nationalism. But the second book, it's more prominent: white supremacy and white nationalism. When I was up, as I said earlier, when I was up in Minnesota, I spent a lot of time with the Somalis, who I had many Somali friends and friends from the war, friends in Minnesota. I also spent a lot of time with these fringe white nationalist groups. And this is way prior to George Floyd, and I'm talking about QAnon, the National Socialist Movement, which is the modern Nazi party, C-cubed, so on and so forth. And I was really, shocked and offended at some of the things they had to say to me. And, they'd show me their safe rooms and their guns and talk about their plots and the hygiene of people of color, all about, violently anti-Semitic statements, Jewish. And, my training as a reporter, just to listen and write and cover, was what I did, but I was deeply offended. And what I found most troubling of all, remember this is way before George Floyd, was connections between the Minneapolis police force and these white supremacist groups. People, I would just say readers, this book was done and over with well before then, but when, they're going to read the part of the book that deals with that. And if you remember, there's one particular Minneapolis cop, a woman, interestingly enough, who was by her father, who becomes a central character in a real Lilith Poe. Really fun. I mean, to create an evil character, a lot of fun.
Yeah, cool. Yeah.
And I really went there with her. People say, oh, he's just ripping off the whole George Floyd thing. Well, I'm not, because that didn't exist when it was written. But it's real. The things you say are real, and it's not just on the web. It's happening in plain daylight. We're seeing it happening. And I mean, what could be a better illustration of that than those lunatics scaling the walls of the Capitol and attacking
and threatening, and people died.
Yes, people
and
died.
wanting to hang Pence. You could
Yeah,
not
really.
like him, but
I mean, it's trite, it's repeating, but I mean, how could anyone
In their right mind?
deny that it happened, or call for the big lie, the election was
right.
And that I mean, just to go back to your first question, that's the importance of journalism. That's of facts. And on the web, they get twisted, they get used. Tucker Carlson, this one, that one. I mean, even this so-called CNN isn't particularly straight anymore either.
No, it's become entertainment. That's what I'm saying. It's very hard.
It's almost
And like when we're talking, I said, this is my opinion. I'm not a journalist. I'm not a qualified journalist. We're magazine people who talk and have a conversation. But so it's different. But it's when it comes to someone documenting what's going on, it's not, you should say when it's your opinion, actually, instead of this is not the fact. I can talk about personal experience, and this is what I experienced, and it may be different for me versus everybody else or whatever it is. But a journalist, I think journalism, I think we're not going to be anywhere without it. Journalism and the arts, we're screwed without them.
Well, journalism is the watchdog of politics.
Yeah.
The watchdog of the government. It's the watchdog. because how would the rest of us know?
And we shouldn't have news channels that are one's Republican, conservative,
Well, no, but
Democratic, progressive.
No, but the
Yeah.
news channels have become more entertainment. So
Yeah.
like CNN and Fox News have a big war going on and they try to outdo each other. So now they're both irrelevant now.
Well, but facts exist.
Yeah.
Facts exist, undeniable facts.
Yeah.
You know, sky is blue, this or and you know, so I'm a wire server. The biggest part of my career, I was a wire service reporter for United International, like the Associated Press and Reuters. For them, they were the largest news organization in the world. And it's different. It's, you know, you're reporting facts without opinion. Of course, there's a certain amount of judgment in how you start the story, how you state your first sentence, how you support it. But there's layers and layers of people of all different persuasions and opinions who edit it. You know, so when UPI doesn't really exist as it used to. So, you know, I like to see the Associated Press or Reuters. National Public Radio is fabulous. People say, well, it's supported by the government, you know. It does get government money, but
Very little after the last few years.
New York Times, you know, is good. The Washington Post is good. The Wall Street Journal is good. But, you know, people, when I teach journalism courses, I teach a lot about how to discern news and information and propaganda. It's really important to understand the difference between the three. And my students, you know, it's like they were dropped on the face of Mars. I mean, they don't have any, you know, us who are older people, you know, have an appreciation for that. But they grew up in this era of
Google.
and you know, what's news, and you know, they get their news. I mean, what is it? I read like 85% of people under 25 get their news from Facebook, off of
Yeah.
Facebook.
Oh, Jesus.
Well, that's part of the problem even during the elections, right? Is that they'll believe whatever pops up on a
But-
Facebook thing.
But that's not rational at all.
Well, it's also it raises what I think is going to be a big battle of the next couple of years, which is, or the Facebooks and Twitters of the world, publishers, and hence have to follow the rules that news organizations follow.
That would be good.
Or as they claim, are they aggregators and simply put stuff together and put it out? Very, you know, if they're news organizations, and they edited and censored like a news organization would. They, you know, knocked President Trump off. Then they have a whole body of laws, a whole body of litigation that's gone to the Supreme Court. New York Times versus Sullivan, et cetera, et cetera. You know, Westmoreland versus the New York Times. There's all of that.
I find it very fascinating. I think you probably saw that I got kicked off of Facebook and Instagram. And I did. I got kicked off because I used a video software. They got a data breach. They got my passwords. They spammed. Even our hosting company kicked me off. I couldn't even look at our websites. And they spammed my Facebook, which was connected to the Instagram. Do not connect your accounts. Don't do it. And so I got taken down. And of course, we're driving through the beginning of a hurricane. And I'm trying to do everything on my phone, one rest area at a time. Next thing you know, everything's taken down. Do you know? And I'm not political. I suppose maybe just, you know, we say things and I'm like, this is a conversation. I don't go on Facebook and say, you know, this person, that, or whatever. I don't do that. I'm like, here's our show. Right after the election, they said, okay, now you can come back to Facebook, but I had to start all over again on everything. Same thing as Instagram. So tell me that it's not, and I know a gazillion travel journalists like us that it happened to, travel people. So I don't know what happened, but there was a whole bunch of us that it happened to, musicians. It's anybody who's traveled.
Huh.
I don't, it's just weird. And the world wants you to be everything on social media. And I just want to tell them the opposite. I won't say those words, but we have to do what we do. But it's a fascinating world. And I really I appreciate what you're writing and what you're doing. And at some point, would love to have you come back on the show and let's talk about real media. And I've got some other people I'd like to put you on with on that,
Oh,
because
cool.
I think it would be
Mhm.
really good. We've got I've got a whole thing going on in the top of my head. So we got to talk
Yeah,
about that for the future too.
and I think there should be something called, there is actually a story behind the headline. So
Yes.
maybe reading headlines is unhealthy.
Yes.
You think?
Actually, we should just do a whole play on headlines. That would be fun.
Like
That would-
Twitter.
Yeah.
You know, a little exercise I do for my journalism students is I have them synthesize a news story into a tweet, or to start a news story as a tweet.
Hmm,
The idea
funny.
of a lead and how to synthesize and concentrate a news story, and it's more accessible to them.
Now you have 240 characters instead of 120.
Oh, that's double the damage.
I love talking to y'all. We always have such a good time. And anytime you want me to come back, I'll do it.
That'd be awesome. Thank you so much. I always learn so much, but I have to say,
Hmm.
seriously, that day, January 6th, as Nancy and I are driving, I'm getting text messages. Where are you girls? Things are going crazy in the country. I'm like, I know, we're listening, to the repeat, and we're hearing all these national security guys going on and just going, this is some, stuff that shouldn't, this is just went off in all the right places. Pretty much things that you were saying on our last conversation. And I'm like, Sid Balman said this. We were talking about, I was like,
But
dude, it happened. What we all had a conversation on that, on air and off air. It's, yeah, and I think you get it when you go into places that do not have democracy. You understand the value of democracy even more. And that's pretty
Well,
much what I was saying. I shouldn't have said it in
I
the
mean,
beginning of our
but-
segment about like who and where, but we don't have democracy like we thought. And I don't think we've had it for a
Well, no,
very
we
long
do.
time.
I wouldn't go that far, but it's shaded at the moment. There's chinks in the armor. I know from living in Kenya, I have been through this before and I'm seeing it. And I saw this like 3 years ago, a little late on it.
Mm.
It probably should have looked 5 years ago, but I was busy. But I saw it coming and I kept saying to Lisa, there's something, this is not right. Something's wrong here. This is not a real president. This is a puppet. This is wrong on all shades.
Mm.
I'm probably going to get a bunch of emails for that, but just go do some homework, people.
That's
This is not a good situation, and it went further than I thought it could go. I thought it would be shut down in early months of it.
that's what
But it's-
murmuration means to me, because there's a feeling you get when you know that when the boat
This
keeps
is not
tilting
right.
and other people feel it, and maybe you don't even you kind of
You
know
can't
what's
put
wrong.
words to it.
But yeah,
It's
I
something's
remember once having a
Mhm.
conversation, and I think it was a radio thing. I remember what it was. It was about Monsanto in Hawaii, and we did a whole thing on it. And I remember walking outside on a summer day in Tucson and getting just a chill across my
Mhm.
body
Yeah.
that I couldn't. It was this unspeakable chill of something is
Something's
going down, and it did go
Yep.
down.
Yep.
So that when you just have that feeling, it's like in South Africa, we knew it was all going to go down, and it did in our streets,
Okay, when we
riots.
lived in Kenya, before the university, apparently, according to the Kenyans, this Kenyan students burnt down the university, except for 2 days before that, were busloads of Chinese coming into Kenya. I stood on a bridge overlooking the city. I'm like, what is this? Talk about chill. I still get it now. Something was going down. And I know in all the countries I've been, before something bad happens, here comes a busload of Chinese. That sounds conspiracy theory, but I'm just saying.
It's that chill factor, the murmuration,
that-
that chill.
There is something that happens 2 days before a bad event
You feel it.
that our police force, our armies, our armed forces should be aware of.
It's
It's
that
like-
gut.
Like a tsunami.
Mhm.
Yeah.
if you look at video of the big tsunami in Southeast Asia, when a tsunami is coming, the water recedes long.
Yeah.
It's like, I mean, I've never been in a tsunami, but I look at those videos like, what's going on? And suddenly this enormous wave comes through.
Yeah, it's a great title. It's a
But
great
you-
word. I love it. I
Wait.
love it. But everyone, again, we got to get running.
sorry.
SidBalman.com is the way. I know we get all riled up. Sid Balman, Balman. The books, Seventh Flag. The second one is Murmuration. Stay tuned for
They're both
Sisterhood.
good.
And keep up with us at bigblendradio.com. Thanks for joining us as always. And of course, we air now Monday through Friday. We expanded our audience time and our radio time. And so stay tuned for new magazines as well. So thanks so much for joining us, everyone. Thank you, Sid.
Thank you for having me. It's so much fun. Thanks.
I'm waiting for your next book.
Yes.